If people come to you asking why the church is doing things, you need to send them to the right source. As an elder, I'm concerned about anything that threatens or helps the church. But underneath that, talk to the person responsible.
Let's walk through just an actual elders meeting. Somebody, we all gather together. What does a healthy elder meeting look like? Because we've seen these that they do get deep in the weeds with the $85 line item. And I had a great conversation with your friend Don Wilson one time about it. And he described it kind of, there's some stuff we need to do, but then there's some things that I need to tell them I'm dreaming about and kind of having a little bit of time to think way into the future. What's a typical elder meeting look like that you've been part of? And how do they, obviously every church is different, but what's healthy eldership look like as far as that 60 to 90 minutes they're together? And is there a time when it goes too long? In other words, some elders meetings I've been in can go 4 or 5 hours, and that's not helpful at all. So what have you seen that works really well?
Well, what works well is, first of all the elders are focused on the mission and vision of the church. So that's what drives us.
Mm-hmm.
But when you come together, what I call it is you have operational issues, which are staff issues. And you have policy issues, which are really elder issues. Where are we trying to go? And it's very important that the chairman can facilitate properly. Because the chairman's role is not to dictate, not to demand. It's really to draw the best out of everybody in that elder meeting. So when you go through that meeting, we did all the mechanics, like, we approved our minutes. We went through our budget, made sure all that's okay. But the highlight of the meeting is what we would call the lead pastor report. In this case, it was Don Wilson. Don, tell us what you're thinking. What do you sense God is saying? Where do you think we need to go? And he had the freedom to, I call it, be pregnant with us, with ideas. And he would we needed to say, Don, what are you thinking? He said, well, I think we might do this, and I think we might do this. And he might even say, I haven't really thought about this, but it just came to me. And as a board, a healthy board, you have to let a visionary vision. Visionaries need the ability to bounce ideas and think about things. And as a board, you can't come back and say, okay, now that's interesting. I think we need to do this and this, and let's put some bolts and nuts on this thing, or it won't work. So a healthy board meeting is where the elders focus on policy, operational issues are handled by staff. Don, in that case, would keep the board updated, make us feel informed and keep us informed, and we respect him. And it's people would often ask us, how do you do this? Can you send me your paperwork on how you do this? I said, it's really team and trust. We're all on the same page. We actually never had a elder fight in those 17 years. So it is doable. But can I speak to an inverted org chart with
Absolutely.
you? Okay. There's 2 org charts I talk to churches about. One is the legal org chart. Legally, the lead pastor reports to the board. That's the legal structure. But the spiritual structure is, I think the board needs to honor the lead pastor as the spiritual leader of the church. Now, some elders will go, well, it's our job to be the spiritual leader. It's the whole group's job to be the spiritual leader. But my view is, if a lead pastor doesn't have more vision and insight on what the church should do than the elder board, that lead pastor is probably not doing their job. So if I'm on your board, Rusty, I want to know, what's God telling you? Let me tell you what God's telling me. But I expect you to lead the church spiritually. And that's why, some pastors will talk to a church and they'll say, we want you to come lead. But they don't really want you to lead. They want you to preach. And they'll confuse people. You're like, okay, now that you're here, like you said, let's see your sermon series. Let's talk about what you're going to do. And by the way, we can do everything but preach. So we hired you to preach. And that causes
problems. Talk to me about the elder that gets stopped in the hallway and somebody says, hey, what's going on with, and they don't know, but they feel like they should know. And I hear this comment a lot from previous experiences and certainly churches where the elder feels such a weight to know everything because they feel like if they get stopped and asked, then they need to have an answer for it or explain something. So if a decision gets made and they don't know about it, they feel like, well, I'm not allowed to do my job well, or you guys are keeping things from me, or, obviously a lot of suspicion gets into this. What's a good approach an elder should have in that situation?
Yeah. Well, first of all, if it is something of a significant nature, the elders should know about it. Again, it's not the parking spaces, how many of the
Right.
parking spaces. But as an elder, as our church changed, I didn't know all of that. And I was okay not knowing all of that. Mm-hmm. So, for example, our church had a choir for a while, several years ago. And quite frankly, we were not a choir church. But we
having a hard time picturing that, by the way.
Yeah, it was different. It was different. So it lasted, 3 or 4 months, and it was stopped. And I had a friend of mine come to me and said, why did you do that? That is my gift from God to the congregation. And I said, you know what? I said, that was the decision made by the church. And I said, I support it because it was made by the church. And if you have more questions, I suggest you go talk to the pastor in charge of that. So I didn't hand them off to that, but people learned after a while, and we insisted on this with our elders. If people come to you asking why the church is doing things, you need to send them to the right source. And particularly even if it's staff asking me, unless this is another term I have, I call it the health of the franchise. As an elder, I'm concerned about anything that threatens or helps the church. But underneath that, talk to the person responsible. So if I had an elder in our eldership who was out answering those questions and people knew that was the conduit, that's someone I would talk to. And if I had elder rotation, it'd be very unlikely they'd be back.
Mm-hmm, definitely.
Does that sound cold?
No, I totally understand what you're saying.